Welcome to None of the Above. My name is Steve Nemirovsky, and I'm your host. None of the Above is a political program, but unlike many political programs, we don't address the pressing issues of the day. We don't take sides on issues. We're a nonpartisan show. The purpose of None of the Above is to talk about how our political system has become so dysfunctional and so polarized, and to talk about solutions to help diminish the polarization and diminish the dysfunction in our system. In our last show, we started a two-part segment on redistricting. Redistricting reminds me of that medical phrase where they talk about something being the silent killer. I think redistricting is the silent killer of the political system because it so skews the results. We've had guests on shows talking about how there's very few contested seats these days, how the action's in the primaries, and a lot of that is due to redistricting and the impact of redistricting and the skewing of elections and ballot access and who's running for office through redistricting. So in the first segment, we had Professor Jackson from the Paul Simon Institute at the Southern Illinois University. And we started our conversation to talk about why redistricting is having the impact it is having on the system. And today we're going to revisit with Professor Jackson, and we're going to talk about some solution sets that are out there. And then in the back half of the program, we're going to interview with a capital action campaign that's taking place in Illinois that's directed to solving the problem in Illinois. Many states have looked at solving the problem. Many states are getting aggressive on solving the problem. We're going to talk about specifically what Illinois is doing to focus on that problem. Before we get to Professor Jackson, I thought we should put in context some of the stuff we talked about in the last program and some of the stuff that we will talk about today. And I've got the whiteboard with me, as I often do. It's a very complicated whiteboard today, so I hope you'll be patient, and we're going to walk our way through it. And when we're done with that, hopefully all of you will have a much better understanding of how this redistricting plays out in the actual election campaigns and in the actual elections. So this particular whiteboard is divided up into sections on the number of votes that were cast, and in this case, the number of votes that were cast during the elections in 2012. And then the other data set are the seats held. In other words, what seats were won in the election. And we're talking about strictly Democrats versus Republicans here. And in this case, the seats that were held in 2013. So the election was 2012. People were inaugurated, sworn in to their seats in 2013. And we're going to look at three separate states. We're going to look at Illinois, which is a demonstrably Democratic state, Indiana, which is a demonstrably Republican state, and Minnesota, which is a state that has a special judicial panel that was in place for their redistricting effort that led to the elections in 2012 and the results in 2013. So we've got three different segments of redistricting, one skewed Democrat, one skewed Republican, and one arguably skewed to neutral. Can you skew to neutral? I don't know. One neutral. So let's look at Illinois. The first column is going to be the vote column, and that's going to be the percentage of the vote. So again, the percentage of the vote. And then the S column is going to be the number of seats held, and that's also going to be a percentage. So if a state had 100 seats in its legislature and half of them were held by Democrats, the number on the board here would be 50 because they had 50%. So let's walk through Illinois and see what happened in a particularly blue state. So the first column here is going to be the congressional election column. C for congressional election. The second column is going to be for state senate. The third column will be for state house, and then it will repeat itself. And I've got red numbers for the Republican numbers and blue numbers for the Democratic numbers. So let's drill down to Illinois. We've got the congressional elections, and 44% of the vote in Illinois was for Republicans trying to elect congressional members. So 44% of all the congressional vote in Illinois was Republican. Yet, there are only 33% of the congressional seats from Illinois are held by Republicans. So you see that 44% of the vote only produced 33% of the seats. Let's drop down here to the Democratic column in Illinois. 55% of the vote went to Democratic congressional candidates. Yet 67% of the congressional seats are held by Democrats. So 44% of the vote Republican, 55% of the vote Democrat, yet 1/3 of the seats only for Republicans and 2/3 for Democrats. So you see the role that redistricting plays. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that with a 44 to 55 split that you would have 44% to 55%. There's so many other variables that go into this that you can't explain everything with statistics. But here they're so skewed that I think it tells a story. So let's look quickly at the state legislature. The Republicans produce 46% of the votes for the state Senate, but only have 32% of the seats. 48% of the vote for the state House, but only have 40% of the seats. Conversely, the Democrats produce 54% of the votes for the state Senate and have a whopping 68% of the seats. In fact, I think the Democrats in Illinois have the largest voting margin of all state senates that there are in the United States. I have that back in my mind. There might be an exception for Hawaii, but that's a pretty skewed state. And the state House, 52% of the vote were for Democrats. It's 60% of the votes, 60% of the seats, rather, are held by Democrats. So you can see how the results are totally skewed in Illinois. And again, this is a Democratic state, and the seats are skewed towards Democrats. We won't go through all the numbers in Indiana, but Indiana, again, is more of a Republican state, and it's skewed the other way around. So in Indiana, 53% of the votes were for Republicans running for Congress. Yet 78% of the seats, of the congressional seats in Indiana, are held by Republicans. The converse, of course, is Democrats produce 45% of the votes for congressional seats, and they have 22% of the congressional seats in Indiana. So this shows you the power of redistricting. In Illinois, the Democrats control the redistricting process, and they have totally skewed the results, or the results are totally skewed based upon the maps that were drawn. And in Indiana, it's the reverse. So now let's look at a state that, again, in Minnesota, was drawn by a special judicial panel. Let's look at the outcome in a state where arguably the map should be more competitive. Here you had 43% of the votes for Congress being voted for Republicans and 56% of the vote for Democrats. Well, the 43% yielded 38% of the congressional seats, and here the 56% yielded 62. So it's a little bit skewed, but not to the degree that you're seeing in these other states. Look at this vote here. The Democrats produce 56% of the votes for the state Senate and hold 58% of the state Senate seats. The Republicans produce 44% of the votes for the state Senate, hold 42% of the state Senate seats. Again, I'm not a student of redistricting in Minnesota, but I think you get a sense that when you do have an independent panel, in this case a special judicial panel, you might have a map that will produce a much more competitive election and a much more balanced legislature in this case. The last set of numbers here I threw up are the national numbers. Now the national numbers are affected by the fact that there's not one national map drawn. Each state draws its own map. And in the last redistricting cycle, the Republicans controlled more states for redistricting. So you would expect in Congress Republicans to control the House of Representatives, which is the case. So Republicans nationwide produced 48% of the vote in 2012, and they have 54% of the seats. The Democrats produced 59% of the votes for Congress and have 46% of the seats. Not as skewed as what you have in Illinois and Indiana, but certainly skewed, and again, a result of this phenomenon that we're calling redistricting and the impact it's going to have not just on dysfunction, but particularly on polarization. It's really the redistricting that is driving the polarization that we have and driving the element of the general election not being competitive and all the action being in the primaries. We're very excited today for our first guest, Dr. John Jackson from the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. So, John, when we left off last time in our interview, we were talking about the process of how redistricting happens, and I love the way you use the phrase blue smoke-filled rooms and red smoke-filled rooms, not just smoke-filled rooms. One of the topics that I wanted to get to that we didn't last time is the notion of transparency and how much of this process is actually public, and in particular, how much of this process is actually public before the votes get taken. I was looking at some literature from the Midwest Democracy Network, and they did an analysis. I don't know if you've seen this, but they looked at the 5 states in the Midwest: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin and Ohio, rather. and they did an analysis of how many days it took from the first time the map was shown till it got voted on until it got finalized in legislation. So in other words, from the introduction of the map to the first vote to passage. And I took the average of those 5 states, and it turned out that from the release of the map that was going to be voted on till the first time they voted on it, so in one chamber, it was 5 days. And the total time it took to pass the map in each state on average, in these states on average, was 10 days. And within that time, the average number of hearings that were conducted were roughly 2.5. So that was at the state level. And then at the federal level, from the time when the map was first released until they voted on it and passed it in the first chamber, it was only 3.5 days. So for the state level, it took 5 days to pass it. Here, only 3.5. And on average, to pass the bill was 10 days again. And for the congressional maps, they only had, on average, 1.5 hearings. So basically, you've got a scenario where from the time the map is released and like the go, we're going to vote on this, you've got only 3 to 5 days before it passes one house, and then basically only 3 to 5 days till it passes another house. So the public is only seeing this for 10 days at most, and they're only going to conduct 1 or 2 hearings during that period of time. So what are we doing wrong here that this is not only done in these smoke-filled rooms, but then we rush it through? We don't discuss it, we don't debate it, we just rush it through to get the result that people want.
I think the fair conclusion from that is the guys in the smoke-filled rooms with the computers and the maps are basically drawing the maps. There may be some incremental changes around the edges. There may ultimately be some compromise forced by the courts, but it's not really a very transparent operation. The public does get some input. It varies by state, but the public is not really all that interested, number one. Most people don't really understand redistricting and how important it is, and even those who do have a very difficult time getting an oar in the water.
Yeah, one of the guests on one of my previous shows basically said we've turned this thing upside down. In redistricting, the voters don't pick their representatives, the representatives pick their voters.
That's exactly right, and that leads to the very deeply red or deeply blue districts that we talked about earlier. It also means that the primary voters in some respects are more important than the general election voters. And as you know, primary turnout is always a fraction of the general election total. And so that means the party base on both sides is dominating who the candidates are going to be, and you're down to the last 2 choices once the general election comes along.
Now, some states have tackled this issue and have, I think they've actually voted as a state on changing the redistricting system. California and Florida, perhaps, they actually voted as the states?
California, Arizona, and Florida have all changed their process recently. We heard from California and Arizona and Florida in that conference that we put on in Springfield. I think the 2 examples in California and Arizona worked out very well from my understanding in the 2010-11 cycle. There's a lot of criticism about how Florida ultimately worked out because it now appears that the insiders ultimately were able to dominate the Florida process much more than you might think.
So when you mention the word insiders, which is, of course, is like a catchphrase in politics nowadays, which insiders is a bad thing, I'm not always in agreement that being an insider is a bad thing, but with redistricting, I think insider definitely is a bad word. How did these other states manage to change the dynamic? How did they get something on the ballot, and how did they get the population to wake up to the evils of this system? Any idea how that happened?
Well, it's by referendum, of course, and California is the easiest place to get referenda items on the ballot if you've got enough money, and they got that done originally because of the leadership of then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and a number of legislative leaders. The same thing happened in Arizona, and the same thing actually happened in Florida. So Basically, it's a tough process, but in some states, various interest groups and leaders have gotten the public's attention, and the public will frequently vote for these reforms.
Well, that's interesting that you said that in those states, for instance, California, the Governor Schwarzenegger was behind this. I would have suspected that the incumbents would not have wanted to make these changes.
You would think that, but often sometimes the governor can be a little more removed and a little less immediately committed to the status quo, which turned out in that case to be the situation with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the time. Many in his own party were not very happy with him for having taken the lead on this particular item.
So in these states where they've sought to make changes, what is it that they're seeking to change? Or conversely, if you ruled the world, what would you try to change? What would be your goal in changing redistricting? What would you do?
Well, I think the ideal, in my view, is to get a somewhat more neutral process into place and somewhat reduce the level of partisanship that is self-evident. The granddaddy of them all in terms of the reforms is the Iowa system, and it's often pointed to as a model, and I think it is in many ways. It's a very technocratic, very number-crunching driven system. They cannot consider incumbency, they cannot consider partisanship, they simply draw the map, and it's done by technocrats who work for the legislature with relatively little partisan influence. Iowa, on the other hand, not only is a good government state, it's also a very regular state that looks like a rectangular loaf of bread. So it's a little easier to do in Iowa than, say, in Illinois. As you know, we're a very irregular state and a very partisan state. In summary, my view is a mixture of what we have now and perhaps the very bloodless and technocratic situation in Iowa. I think there are inevitably going to be partisan considerations and places where the parties have a very clear advantage because of geography and housing patterns. There are always going to be some very clearly blue districts and some very clearly red districts, and we might as well start with that assumption. What we need, however, is way more marginal and competitive districts than we're getting now.
Are you finding, or whoever's doing the measuring, finding that in some of these states where they've made the transition, Iowa, California, Florida, Arizona, whatever, well, maybe not Florida because you said it may not have worked out as well there, but in these other states, are they in fact getting more competitive districts?
I think that is the record for a long time in Iowa, and my understanding is it turned out to be the record both for California and Arizona this time. In Florida, the Republicans had such total control of the state, both governor and the legislative body, that in spite of the referendum that had been passed that insisted on no consideration of partisanship and incumbency, they wound up considering it anyway, is my understanding of the conflict that's going on in Florida at this time.
So, yeah, I've heard of Iowa. They literally, as you said, it's just all computer model. They put the variables in and the numbers in, and the computer spits something out, correct?
That is correct, and they often throw incumbent legislators into the same district, and they have to fight it out the next time around in very competitive districts.
You mentioned incumbency, and I'd like to talk about that for a minute or two. I don't think many people, again, think about redistricting, and then they don't think about incumbency within redistricting. You have these legislators, and they're living in their houses, right? And some of them have lived in their house since the day they were born, and they not only want to have a good district where they could be reelected, they want to make sure that they don't have to move, correct?
Oh, exactly. They would very much like to have the friendliest district possible, and they'd like their house to be right in the middle of it. And many times they get that. As you know, incumbency is the #1 consideration. Very, very difficult to defeat an incumbent. The rate of reelection to U.S. House seats is always above 90%. It's a little lower than that, somewhere between 70 and 80 for U.S. senators who have more competitive districts usually because they have a full state, obviously. The rate of re-election in state legislative bodies is often near to that in the U.S. House. It's very difficult to beat an incumbent unless you take on the incumbent in the primary, as we discussed previously.
So in these states where they've gone to these different models, what I think they've done is they've tried to introduce neutrality in the makeup of the body that's doing that has the crayons, correct?
That is correct. And they won't let you consider where the incumbent lives or what the partisan composition of the various districts would look like based on past voting patterns.
Yeah, and I think another goal of some of these places where they've accomplished changes is to have, I don't know what they call the name of it, but to allow for the commonality of the voter. When I remember in Illinois, in Springfield was the state capital, I think in the previous map, 3 different congressional districts shared Springfield. So Springfield was just chopped up into pieces.
Yeah, that's true. And Bloomington Normal had the same problem. They had 3 different slices of state legislative districts in a city of, 120,000 or about 100,000 in Springfield. Those are things that should be avoided to the extent possible. There is the concept of protecting geographical boundaries that already exist. Almost all state constitutions and state legislation provides for that. Sometimes it gets blatantly ignored. The phrase that you were looking for is called communities of interest. That's not necessarily the same as the geographical boundaries of a county or a city, for example, although they can be the same thing. But most state legislative acts, as well as constitutions, put a premium on protecting those boundaries and protecting those communities of interest. But if something has to give in competition with incumbency and partisanship always holds sway.
And then we're back to the gerrymandering where they get to draw a district that is going to pretty much guarantee re-election, if not for them, but someone else in their party.
Exactly. And then they slice up Springfield 3 different ways and Bloomington Normal 3 different ways.
Well, this has been very helpful, and I know that there's an effort through the Midwest Democracy Network in these different 6 states in the Midwest to try and create some energy to get to some of these differing approaches like they did in California and Arizona. If someone wanted to drill down in Illinois and take a look at the Simon Institute and get a little more information on this and look at your program on Who Has the Crayons, how do they get to your site? How do they learn about the program and get better educated on this topic?
We have a website, paulsimoninstitute.siu.edu, and we'd be happy to have visitors. We have a lot of good information on that website, and we're constantly updating it. We'd be delighted to have visitors.
Well, thank you, John. You've been a terrific guest, and if I were going back to school again, I'd want to take one of your classes because you explain things just so clearly and that anyone that's listening to you can't help but come away with a great understanding of your topic. So you're a great gentleman, and we thank you for your time.
Okay, Steve, it was a pleasure being on and visiting with you.
Welcome back to None of the Above. I certainly hope you enjoyed our last segment. I thought Professor Jackson was a terrific guest. In fact, I wish I was in college taking a class from Professor Jackson. He's very knowledgeable on his subject, and he speaks so clearly, and you really come away from a conversation with him thinking that you've really learned something and gained something. So at this point, we've now done 2 sessions on redistricting. Professor Jackson, in our first segment in our last show, talked about the background, the history, the constitutional implications, etc. And then today we talked about some solution sets, not necessarily at the 10,000-foot level, but certainly a little more conceptual. What we're going to do in this next segment is drill down even further into the world of redistricting, and we're going to talk to Michael Kolenc from Yes for Independent Maps. It's an Illinois organization that's working on the ground as we speak to try and make a difference in redistricting. And I would suggest to you that Yes for Independent Maps is not a lot different than what's going on in many other states at this point in time. A lot of people have awakened to redistricting. They're fed up with what's going on with redistricting. They want transparency. They want independence. They do not want their legislators picking who they're going to represent. So again, we're going to spend some time today with Mike and talk about his organization, what they're about and what they're doing. And for those of you that have been with us before, you know that one of the important parts of this show is to talk about how to get involved in politics, how to build coalitions. We're going to overlap a little bit and combine the two thoughts together. So Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And you are the campaign manager for Yes for Independent Maps.
That's right.
And before we got on the show, you said your mother doesn't know what you do. So now's the time to tell your mother what it is you do when you go to work.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the job of a campaign manager, it really is to come and form the foundation for an operation, be it a small race or a large race. You know, campaigns are nothing more than businesses that must raise sometimes incredible amounts of capital in a very short time, create very vast infrastructures, get people up to speed on an issue in order to achieve a very, very specific goal, which, you know, for the most part is victory on election day.
And that's an interesting point we want to make here. You are in the middle of a campaign. You consider yourself in the middle of an election. Come November 14, you plan to be on the ballot and you plan to win an election, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about what your campaign is and what the election victory you hope to gain in November.
Yeah. So Yes for Independent Maps is a grassroots statewide coalition, a political campaign that's working to place an independent redistricting amendment on the Illinois Constitution in 2014. So in order to do that, we must go through the ballot measure process. We must collect signatures by May 4th deadline. We need about 300,000 signatures of Illinois registered voters to get on the ballot in November 2014.
And the number 300,000, is that a constitutional mandate, a statutory mandate?
It is. It's a mandate. It's a percentage of a previous gubernatorial race. I'm not sure if it's 8 or 10, but it's 298,000 and change signatures we need. Of course, you know, because we'll have bad signatures and we'll face court challenges on signatures. We obviously aim for much higher than that.
Okay, and then you plan to get your issue on the ballot, and then you will be having a full-blown political campaign in November, the goal of which is to get people to vote for you. Do you need a majority vote, a supermajority vote? What's your goal on this one?
Yeah, so we either need a simple majority, 50% plus one of everyone that votes on Election Day in November, or, which is more likely, we need 60% plus one of people that only vote on our issue. So there's something in campaign jargon called drop-off. You know, people go vote for governor and senator, and slowly as they go down the ballot, they stop voting. So we need to capture 60% plus one of everyone that votes on this initiative in order to win.
So there's obviously a group of people in Illinois who've come together and decided that redistricting isn't working in Illinois. How did that start to happen? What's the math behind that?
Yeah, so really this all came about with the Blagojevich scandal a few years ago, and I'm sure your viewers are well aware of the trials and tribulations that involved where that happened there. Really some good government reform-minded groups came out of that and really set about creating better government in Illinois. And, you know, they passed campaign finance, and this was really the next issue that they wanted to tackle. So this coalition made up of the League of Women Voters, Common Cause, PERG, and a whole bunch of other reform-minded groups came together, studied best practices across the country, and really looked at the California model for independent redistricting commissions and tried to make that model work within the unique constitutional confines of Illinois. So really this was a 2-year process of a lot of nonprofit, reform-minded groups and individuals across the state figuring out how to make this process more transparent, more fair, more independent, and drawn, quite frankly, with nonpartisan criteria.
So how long ago did this get formed, this effort?
Yeah, so the campaign formed late summer once the actual language of the constitutional amendment was finalized. You know, at that point, they handed it off to me, and we formed the campaign, Yes for Independent Maps, and went about building a statewide coalition of both Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, business community, reform community, everyone to get on board with this. And we've been circulating petitions over the past many months. as you might imagine, circulating petitions in the Midwest or Illinois, for that matter, during the winter is not easy. It's been a very snowy day in Chicago as well as the rest of the state. So collecting these petition signatures is a challenge. Illinois is not like California, where they legislate by ballot measure, where they have the infrastructure really to gather hundreds of thousands of signatures. We're having to create something from start here in Illinois, and that's one of the major problems that we face as a statewide campaign right now, is really getting these signatures to place this on the ballot in November.
And I take it the impetus for this, again, is a dissatisfaction with the map that got drawn based upon the 2010 census and then the election results from that initial map.
Well, I think it's more complex than that. It's really a snowball effect that's been happening decade after decade. We've seen public polling. The Paul Simon Institute does some good polling on this, and they've been able to track over time really the anxiety that Illinois has with the redistricting process. And the most current Paul Simon Institute poll really reflects our internal polling, that about 70% of people across the political spectrum are not happy with how maps are drawn right now. Democrats, Republicans, and independents in this state are not happy. So this really isn't a partisan issue. Mistakes that a lot of campaigns will make when they're trying to implement this is that the party that's out of power in the state house will really be the one will be the force behind the campaign. That's really not the case here in Illinois. We have a coalition that spans the political spectrum. We have David Axelrod and Bill Daley, former Secretary of Commerce and Obama Chief of Staff, along with all the Republican gubernatorial candidates and some very right-leaning individuals in the state. It is a left and right coalition that's really come together because now is the time really to fix this process.
So you get all these people together, they say, we've got a problem, and you know that you have to get something on the ballot, you have to amend the Constitution in Illinois,
Yep.
but you have to come up with a solution set. You have to decide what your solution is. So how does this group, in working together, formulate the solution, and what is that solution that you've come up with?
Yeah, well, I mean, the good part is that a lot of this heavy lifting was done by these reform groups over the past 2 years. So they really handed us an amendment to the Constitution that is sound constitutionally, that we believe will pass Supreme Court muster, and that is very popular with the public. It really works to set an independent commission in place that is free from partisan politics. For example, if you are an elected official at any level in the state, if 3 years before this commission is set, you ran for office, if you're a state employee or a government employee, if you're a state lobbyist, a federal lobbyist, if you have a contract with the state, any of those people described cannot be on this commission. And then for a period of 10 years after, you cannot run for state office, nor can you be appointed to any position in the state that requires Senate confirmation. So, this framework really works to place an independence within the system that has not existed in Illinois previously. In Illinois there is a habit, and this is not unique to Illinois. There is a habit everywhere of people trying to game the system for their own benefit or the benefit of their political party. The criteria we've set out for this independent commission, we feel, really negates that.
And how about transparency? How do you deal with that issue?
Yeah, so we like to say that this is going to be the most transparent part of state government. Any two commission members meeting is an open meeting. We have to see their minutes. We have to see them talk. Any meetings they have, we have to see. They have to be 48 hours notice of any meetings they do. They have to tour the state at least once in every judicial district before and after the maps are drawn. And even the intake of resumes to be on this commission is considered open meeting, and everyone gets to see exactly who's applying and exactly who's being pulled out because they have a conflict of interest.
So you mentioned that some of the modeling here was done after California.
Yeah.
California's how many years ahead on this? Like 6 or 8 years ahead, based on what they did?
Yeah, a little bit. But they passed it in 2008, so they had maps drawn in 2010. And then implemented, 2012 after the census there. But, they've seen a tone change in Sacramento. No longer are they facing, the budget impasses and the gridlock from before. People are actually working together, working across the aisle to get things done in California. And, this coalition will be very clear that we're not pushing any one agenda item. We have the Chamber of Commerce and the Legal Women Voters and PERG on board.
Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt, but staff tells me we're having some video problems here. So if it's okay with you, what I think we'll do is we'll take the last good-looking still frame of you that we had on the screen, and we'll post that. And then you and I will do a bit of a radio interview for the last 5 minutes. Is that okay with you?
That sounds perfect.
Perfect. So I think where we left off is I was asking you about one of the goals of this effort is to create a competitive environment in the political sphere and how that related to what your mission is and what you found in California.
Yeah, so really competitiveness is not a part of the criteria we have for drawing maps. You know, a lot of times we're more focused on keeping communities of interest whole, be they economic, social, language, or minority. You know, too many times our political leaders, regardless of political party, are drawing maps so that they can reward their friends and punish their foes. And they do that by looking at house by house and looking at voting records and seeing how they can create districts and weaken districts. So competitiveness really is not a criteria set forth in this amendment.
So when you structure the amendment, do you have to define your goals, or do you just define the amendment and know what your goals are?
So we actually defined the criteria for drawing maps inside of the amendment. You know, the commission will get to, you know, the regulatory process after this passes will add some more detail into what some of these terms mean. For example, what, you know, when we say not to draw to discriminate against or in favor of any political party or group, that a little bit of that has to be defined in the regulatory process. But these reform groups have been at this for many years, and they intend to be, you know, at the table talking with the state once this passes in November, so they can actually see their vision for a fair, independent redistricting process enshrined in the state.
And again, this is going on in many other states around the country as we speak, correct?
That's what our understanding is. You know, we've had a lot of groups reach out to us actually for advice on this. You know, most recently we've had folks in Michigan reach out to our campaign about what we did and how we're working. You know, unfortunately or fortunately, my job is to make sure that this gets on the ballot in Illinois and achieves victory in November. So we don't have a lot of time to be helping other states. But this is something that is going on across the country as we speak.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross over to another issue we've talked about on None of the Above a few times and see how it's impacting you, which is campaign finance. What campaign finance laws are restricting you in terms of how you raise money, if any?
Really, in Illinois, there are no campaign finance limits on what a ballot initiative committee can raise. You know, I can raise unlimited amounts of money from individuals, unions, corporations. Really, the only issue is a political issue. Do I take, you know, $1 million from the Koch brothers or from George Soros? Really is a political question more than a legal question. You know, there are no limits, but like any other political campaign, we have to report on a regular basis what all of our contributions are. There's a, you know, if we take in something that's more than $1,000, it has to be reported within 5 days. So there is 100% transparency on the intake and expenditure side, but there are no limits on what we can take.
And even though this is something that's being voted on, essentially your finances are considered about 100% soft money, I take it?
Correct.
Okay. So in the remaining time, I just to recap again for our viewers, I think you've done what we've talked about on our show in terms of how you build a campaign, how you build a coalition, how you define an issue. And the last piece we want to talk about is how people get active. So how do people find you? How do they contribute? People in Illinois or wherever, how do they help you push this over the goal line? Give us the spiel. Yeah,
so, you know, yes, for independent maps, you can find us on the web at independentmaps.org. You know, anyone in Illinois, we encourage you to help us circulate petitions. Really, we're looking at about, I think it's 89 days before our 300,000 signatures are due in Springfield. So anyone that comes to our website and requests one petition to 100 petitions, we put those in the mail the same day to you, give you instructions for do's and don'ts and how to collect signatures and a return address to send them back. For folks that would like to contribute, I would encourage you to go to the same website, independentmaps.org, and you do not have to be from Illinois to contribute to this campaign. We'll gladly take a contribution from $5 all the way up, and we encourage that, you know, because this is really about, you know, putting an independent process in place to draw maps so that there's faith in this system. And, you know, what I tell people is if this can happen in Illinois, this can happen anywhere.
I think that's a good way to conclude. If this can happen in Illinois, this can happen anywhere. So, Michael, thank you very much for your time. We wish you all the best with your campaign, and perhaps we'll have you back for a rematch later in the year to see how things are going.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Our next guest is Karen Jagoda. Karen is the president of eVoter Institute and the host of Digital Politics Radio. She's joining us every week to educate people on how to use this internet, this amazing democratic tool, to advance causes and candidacies and issue development. Today she's going to talk about targeting online ads. So Karen, what do you want us to know about targeting online ads?
Howdy, Steve. Well, today I really wanted to emphasize how important online ads are for both persuasion and for calls to action. We see so many online ads for consumer products and for services, and political online ads can get attention. And the real key about targeting online ads is understanding who your audience is. And that's where this whole idea of big data is coming in, and finding your supporters through research that these big data companies have come up with in order to find behavioral characteristics that may be predictive of how candidates would appeal to a particular kind of voter. We've learned a lot more about voter behavior recently, and this whole world of online ad targeting is really just starting to reveal itself in how powerful it can be. So when you put a TV ad out there and a child is watching the ad, or someone gets up to get something out of the refrigerator, no, they're not watching your political ad on TV. You're wasting your money. If you do the political ads online targeted to people where they're most likely to see the ad at a day part, when they're most likely to be receptive to the ad, you can really get a lot more bang for your buck. And a lot of the companies I've had on the digitalpoliticsradio.com show have gone into this world in a very big way. One of the companies I've talked with over the years is Rocket Fuel. They're very big on big data and data mining. The folks at Resonate Insights have also gotten very involved in data mining and figuring out what emotional appeals people have that can be kind of used in a political campaign to get people's attention or to get them to vote for a particular candidate or cause. I've also talked with folks on both the left and the right. Targeted Victory, a big group there in Washington, D.C., worked for Mitt Romney, have worked for a lot of Republican candidates, and they're very keyed into targeting online ads to specific audiences. Also, Bully Pulpit in Washington worked for the Obama team. Big time online targeting, online ads used in a way that are very effective and really communicate a message to people who need to hear the message and will respond to the message. So the idea of sort of just throwing money against the wall when they're doing TV ads is really a problem.
Karen, we just have a few seconds remaining, but the point here is all these tools you talked about and are used by Obama and Romney, et cetera, these are tools that can be taken by local interest groups, local candidates, small, tiny campaigns and issues, and all these same tools apply to those groups as well.
Absolutely. And the key here is knowing who your supporters are and targeting those ads to those people, not just putting out ads that people who can or won't vote for you see. So absolutely, you can do it on your own. You can work with an agency. You can learn and experiment, and it's not very expensive, and it can really be very effective for a local and state campaign.
Karen, as always, thank you for your great insight, and for those looking to find you at eVoter Institute and Digital Politics Radio. Thank you again.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much for watching. As always, we hope that you were both educated and entertained. We have now examined two of the four primary aspects of legislated incumbency protection. In past shows, we talked about refinancing, not refinancing, campaign finance, and today we finished our segments on redistricting. These are probably the two strongest and most compelling examples of why we have dysfunction and why we have polarization, because the campaign finance laws and the redistricting are so beneficial to the incumbents that we're really at a point where we have very little competition, and we've got to find ways to drive that competition. So I hope you enjoyed the second segment today, talking about how to get involved and how there could be action to solve this redistricting problem. And you see that in California, where they have made some changes, they have had some positive results. So there is an opportunity here to achieve some results. We just have to make sure that we put in the effort. In fact, that'll be today's homework assignment. For those of you who haven't been with us before, we have a homework assignment on every show. The good news is you don't turn it in and it's not graded, but it's a nice way for you to put your toe in the political water, maybe spend 15 minutes of each week trying to get involved and maybe find an issue that is exciting to you and one that you want to pay attention to and get involved in. So what I'd like you to do today is see if you can figure out how your state handles redistricting. What is the process? And then see if you can drill down and look at the statistics the way we did today. How many people voted in your state based upon their party affiliation? And then what did that produce in terms of results for your congressional delegation, your state senate, your state house of representatives? And then you'll get a flavor for whether or not redistricting is having an impact on dysfunction and polarization in your state. Perhaps it isn't, but in most states it is. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand how this is happening. And then ask ourselves the next question. Is there a way to get involved? Maybe there's an organization in your state, just as Michael's organization, that's getting active in redistricting. You want to get involved and help them and solve some problems. I would suggest to you, if you get involved in this particular problem and you help solve it, you will be very happy that you did, and you will find that the results are going to make a huge impact on where we're going in our political system. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments on the show, you can contact us at info@noneoftheabove.us, info@noneoftheabove.us. You can check us out on our website at thirdparty101.com, thirdparty101.com. And my college daughter, well, all my daughters are Facebook fanatics. My college daughter's a Facebook fanatic, so she said, Dad, you have to have a Facebook page. So you can find us on Facebook too. Don't ask me how to find us on Facebook, but if you're a aficionado of Facebook, I'm sure you'll be able to find None of the Above. So again, thank you for joining us. And as always, we ask you to remember, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Thank you.